Tonight I'm going to do a quick video on Glock trigger pull and just overall trigger manipulation. This isn't, I mean, I'm sure a lot of you guys out there are thinking, dude, I know how to pull a trigger, you just pull it straight back. But there are actually a couple more steps to it than that. You can see this gun is not loaded, there's nothing in the chamber. I'll check it. Yep, nothing there. So I'm going to go ahead and let the slide down. Pulling the trigger on a handgun is especially a striker fired handgun like a Glock or Smith & Wesson M&P or XD, is a three-step process. But the three steps kind of flow into one another and they become very fast the more you practice them. But it's three different conscious steps that you have to do in order to get a good accurate shot. The first being you actually have to put your finger into the trigger guard. Now obviously don't put your finger on the trigger or anywhere near it until you're ready to fire. That's just basic gun safety, and like you saw, this gun was safety checked before I ever touched the trigger. So that's the first step, putting your finger on the trigger. The next step, especially on a Glock trigger, there's this little area of movement there that you do. That's just there to prep the trigger, and then you pull it back until a point, and then you'll feel it kind of stop. There's an area there where you have to apply more pressure to get it to pull the rest of the way. This is the part of the trigger pull that you have to pay attention to. You keep applying pressure until you feel it break. Slowly. Now that's the part of the trigger pull you have to pay attention to. So those three steps are as follows: you put your finger into the trigger guard, take up slack, and then concentrate, slow press to the rear until it breaks. That gets to be second nature after you practice it. It's just, you have to have the conscious effort to do all of those steps the right way. It's not just, doing that. That's called slapping the trigger, and that's when your shots go all over the place. After you pull the trigger, the gun will cycle. It will fire, eject the round, the spent casing, and then slide a new casing or a new round into the chamber. All the while that's happening, you need to have your finger pressed on the trigger and have it in the rear position like this, just like that. Don't let the trigger back out during recoil. That's called follow through. If you follow through with your trigger pull, the gun will completely, it'll recoil, come back down, back on target, and your trigger finger will still be in the rearward position the entire time. After you've reacquired your target in your sights, then you start letting the trigger back out until what's called trigger reset. You let it out until it resets. Now that little click you heard, that is the reset. You don't have to let it out any further than that, and then you pull it back again. Once you do this, you'll get it practiced and built into your muscle memory enough to where it'll become second nature. And if you do this the right way, it will almost seem like the trigger pull is lighter the second time, but it's not really lighter. It's just, you're not having to deal with all of that extra motion. And this is how you speed up your trigger pulls and get more accurate shots. It's an overall more efficient way of doing it than slapping the trigger over and over. I mean, it took me forever to get this worked into my muscle memory, and I mean, it was an idea that I almost just flat out rejected. I mean, I'd spent my entire time as a shooting enthusiast, you know, jerking the trigger, and I had gotten to the point where it's just what I felt comfortable with doing. But after I started practicing this, I had to work all the bad habits out of my shooting, and after I started practicing the trigger control, my shooting improved drastically. I mean, it's worth the effort that it takes. So just to kind of recap on this, there's 3 steps to pulling the trigger. There's 1, putting your finger on the trigger, then 2, taking up slack, and then 3, focusing on that slow press to the rear until you hear it break. Then the gun will recoil, cycle, and then you hold it back during all of that, let it come out until you hear the click, and then fire your second shot. And wash, rinse, repeat until you have to change out mags. And that's the proper technique for shooting a Glock or any other handgun or rifle. Semi-automatic rifles have trigger reset just like handguns do. And on guns like my AK-74 here, this particular one has the Tapco G2 trigger as a U.S. compliance part, the 922R compliance. If you when you're shooting and you let it out to reset, it'll almost fall, like with no pressure. But I mean, you do have to be applying pressure. You can control it, but it's a very light reset, and it makes double taps really easy. So using that proper technique will really help you. And I hope this video helps somebody, because I know this school of thought and practicing this has really helped me in my shooting. So hope you enjoy this video. Thanks guys, and I'll catch you later.